Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. The Unsettling Corner. It started with Rusty, my loyal golden retriever, barking at the corner of my bedroom every night. At first, I dismissed it as one of those strange dog behaviors, a quirk, something he'd soon grow out of. But as the weeks dragged on, his relentless barking grew more frantic, more desperate. His eyes would fixate on that same spot, wide with a terror I had never seen before. "Rusty, what's wrong, boy?" I'd whisper, but he would only whine and glance back at the corner, his tail tucked between his legs. It was unnerving. The corner, to me, looked like any other part of my small, cramped room. Yet, Rusty's reaction was anything but ordinary. One night, curiosity gnawed at me. What was it about that corner? Why did it inspire such dread in Rusty? I decided to set up my camera, a simple device I used for vlogging, to record throughout the night. Maybe, just maybe, it would capture whatever was causing Rusty's distress. That night, Rusty's barking was more frantic than ever. His howls pierced through the silence of the house, sending chills down my spine. I lay in bed, heart pounding, unable to sleep. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted off into a restless slumber. The next morning, I eagerly retrieved the camera. As I watched the footage, a sense of dread filled my stomach. The night vision revealed Rusty barking incessantly at the corner, just as he had every night. But this time, there was something else. A faint, almost imperceptible movement. My breath caught in my throat. I rewound the tape, my eyes glued to the screen. There, in the shadows of the corner, a figure emerged. It was a man, tall and thin, with a sinister smile etched on his pale face. He stood there, motionless, watching Rusty. Watching me. His eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to bore into my soul through the screen. My hands trembled as I paused the video. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of glitch, a trick of the light. But the terror in Rusty's eyes told me otherwise. Something was in my room, something that only Rusty could see. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to confront the presence directly. That night, I sat in bed, camera in hand, pointing it towards the corner. Rusty sat beside me, his body trembling, his eyes fixated on the darkened spot. As the hours ticked by, my fear grew. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, made me jump. And then, just as the clock struck midnight, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath became visible in the frigid air. Rusty's growls grew more ferocious, his hackles raised. Suddenly, the figure appeared. He stepped out of the shadows, his smile wider, more menacing. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay still, to capture every detail on camera. The man's eyes locked onto mine, and he began to speak, his voice a chilling whisper that echoed in the silence. "You shouldn't have looked," he said, his smile never faltering. "Now, you've invited me in. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories." The air in my room felt heavy, suffocating, as the smiling man's words hung in the air. Rusty's growling grew more intense, and I could feel the vibrations through the bed. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear and curiosity. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice trembling. The smiling man's grin widened impossibly, his teeth gleaming in the dim light. "I've been here for a long time," he whispered, his voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "Waiting. For what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "For you to notice," he replied, his dark eyes glinting with malice. "Now that you have, we are bound." I shuddered, my mind racing to find some explanation, some way out of this nightmare. "What do you want?" My voice was barely audible over the pounding of my heart. He tilted his head, as if considering the question. "To play," he said finally, his tone playful yet sinister. "You see, it gets lonely here, in the shadows. And now, you're part of my game." Rusty's barks turned to whimpers, and he backed away, his eyes never leaving the figure in the corner. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but my hands refused to move. The smiling man took a step forward, and the temperature dropped even further. Frost formed on the window pane, and I could see my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to be brave. "I won't play your game," I said, though my voice betrayed my fear. "I won't let you terrorize me." The smiling man chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, but you already are," he said. "Every night, you feel my presence. Every night, you hear your dog's cries. You can't escape me." Desperation clawed at my chest. I had to find a way to end this, to banish the smiling man once and for all. My eyes darted to the camera, still recording everything. Maybe, just maybe, someone else could help me make sense of this. Someone who knew more about the supernatural. The following day, I contacted an old friend, Evelyn, who had always been fascinated by the paranormal. I explained everything to her, from Rusty's strange behavior to the horrifying footage on the camera. She listened intently, her face growing more serious with each passing moment. "This is bad," she said finally. "You've attracted a malevolent spirit. These entities feed on fear and grow stronger with each interaction. The more you engage with him, the more powerful he becomes." "What do I do?" I asked, panic rising in my voice. Evelyn glanced at the camera. "First, we need to cleanse your home. There are rituals, protections we can use. But you must be careful. One wrong move, and you could make things worse." We spent the next few hours preparing, gathering materials and setting up wards around the house. Evelyn guided me through each step, her knowledge and calm demeanor providing a sliver of hope. As night fell, the sense of dread returned, but this time, I felt a spark of determination. With Evelyn by my side, we entered my room. Rusty followed, his eyes wary but trusting. We began the ritual, chanting ancient words of protection and banishment. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to writhe with anger. The smiling man appeared again, his grin more twisted, his eyes burning with fury. "You think you can get rid of me?" he hissed, his voice echoing with malice. "You are mine." But this time, I wasn't alone. Evelyn's voice joined mine, strong and unwavering. Together, we faced the entity, our voices rising in defiance. The room shook, the lights flickered, and for a moment, I feared we had failed. Then, with a final, ear-piercing scream, the smiling man vanished. The temperature returned to normal, and the oppressive weight lifted from the room. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. Rusty came to my side, licking my face and wagging his tail. Evelyn placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's over," she said softly. "For now." Days passed, and life slowly returned to normal. The house felt lighter, and Rusty no longer barked at the corner of the room. Evelyn's ritual seemed to have worked, and I began to believe that the nightmare was finally over. I resumed my daily routine, but the memory of the smiling man lingered in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness I had faced. One evening, I decided to take Rusty for a walk in the nearby woods. The air was crisp, and the fading sunlight cast long shadows on the ground. Rusty trotted happily beside me, his tail wagging in contentment. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded me for weeks. As we ventured deeper into the woods, a sense of unease began to creep in. The shadows grew longer, and the trees seemed to close in around us. Rusty stopped suddenly, his ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. "What is it, boy?" I asked, looking around nervously. The woods were silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. But Rusty's growl persisted, and his gaze was fixed on a darkened path ahead. Curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously followed Rusty's lead. The path led to a clearing, where an old, decrepit house stood. Its windows were broken, and the roof sagged under the weight of years of neglect. A chill ran down my spine as I approached the house, memories of the smiling man flooding back. Against my better judgment, I decided to explore the house. I tied Rusty to a tree nearby, not wanting to put him in danger. "Stay here, Rusty," I whispered. "I'll be right back." I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the remnants of furniture lay scattered around. As I ventured further, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. In the center of the living room, I found an old, tattered journal. The pages were yellowed with age, and the writing was barely legible. I flipped through the pages, my heart racing as I read the entries. They spoke of a man, a spirit who haunted the house, tormenting its inhabitants with his sinister smile. The final entry was dated decades ago and detailed a desperate attempt to banish the spirit. The writer described a ritual similar to the one Evelyn and I had performed. But something had gone wrong, and the smiling man had been released, free to roam and terrorize once more. A loud crash echoed through the house, and I jumped, dropping the journal. My heart pounded as I backed away, my eyes darting around the room. The shadows seemed to move, and a familiar, chilling voice whispered in my ear. "You thought you were free," the smiling man hissed. "But I'm still here, watching, waiting." Panic surged through me as I stumbled out of the house, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Rusty barked frantically, sensing my fear. I untied him and we ran, the sound of the smiling man's laughter echoing behind us. When we finally reached home, I collapsed on the couch, my mind racing. How had he returned? Had we failed to banish him completely? I grabbed my phone and called Evelyn, my hands shaking as I recounted what had happened. "This is worse than I thought," Evelyn said, her voice tense. "The smiling man must be tied to that house. We need to go back and finish what we started. But this time, we need to be prepared for anything." Fear gnawed at me, but I knew she was right. The smiling man was still out there, lurking in the shadows, and he wouldn't stop until he had claimed me. We had to confront him once more, to end his reign of terror for good. That night, Evelyn and I gathered our supplies and made our way back to the old house. The moon was high in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the decaying structure. As we stepped inside, the air grew cold, and the familiar sense of dread returned. "We need to find the source of his power," Evelyn whispered. "Something in this house is keeping him here." Together, we searched the house, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Every creak and whisper set my nerves on edge. Then, in the basement, we found it, an old mirror, covered in dust and grime. Its surface was cracked, and an unnatural darkness seemed to seep from it. "This must be it," Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to destroy it." As we prepared to shatter the mirror, the smiling man appeared, his eyes burning with rage. "You will not take this from me," he screamed, his voice echoing through the house. The smiling man lunged at us, his form twisting and contorting with a malevolent energy. Evelyn and I stood our ground, determined not to let him intimidate us. Rusty barked ferociously at the apparition, his courage bolstering our resolve. Evelyn thrust a silver dagger into my hand. "We need to break the mirror," she said urgently. "It's the source of his power. Without it, he'll be trapped and weakened." The smiling man's laughter filled the room, a chilling sound that reverberated through my bones. "You think you can defeat me?" he snarled, his eyes glowing with an eerie light. "I've existed for centuries. You are nothing but a fleeting moment in my eternal night." Ignoring his taunts, I gripped the dagger tightly and approached the mirror. The closer I got, the colder the air became, as if the very life was being sucked out of the room. Evelyn chanted incantations, her voice steady and strong, weaving a protective barrier around us. Just as I raised the dagger to strike, the smiling man's form shifted, and he appeared directly in front of me, his smile widening into an inhuman grimace. His eyes bored into mine, and for a moment, I was paralyzed by the sheer malevolence emanating from him. "You will not win," he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "I will see to it that you suffer, that you know true despair." Summoning every ounce of courage, I swung the dagger with all my might. The blade connected with the mirror, and a deafening shatter filled the room. The mirror exploded into countless shards, each one reflecting the smiling man's horrified expression. A guttural scream tore from his throat as his form began to waver and dissolve. Evelyn continued her chants, her voice growing louder and more commanding. The air crackled with energy, and the room seemed to pulse with light. The smiling man's body disintegrated, his dark essence sucked into the void left by the shattered mirror. For a moment, everything was still. The oppressive weight lifted, and the temperature returned to normal. I sank to my knees, exhausted but relieved. Rusty nuzzled my side, his tail wagging in triumph. "We did it," I breathed, turning to Evelyn. "We actually did it." Evelyn nodded, though her expression was somber. "The mirror is destroyed, and the smiling man is weakened. But he's not gone. Spirits like him are resilient. We've only bought ourselves time." A sense of unease crept back in. "What do you mean? He can come back?" Evelyn sighed. "It's possible. We've broken his hold on this place, but his essence still lingers. We need to be vigilant to ensure he doesn't find another way back." I nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. We needed to be prepared for whatever might come next. Over the following weeks, we fortified the house with protective charms and wards. Evelyn taught me how to recognize signs of spiritual activity and how to strengthen my own defenses. Rusty remained by my side, his presence a comforting reminder of our shared ordeal. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a chill in the air. Rusty stirred at the foot of the bed, his ears perked up. I reached for my camera, now a constant companion, and switched it to night vision. Slowly, I panned it across the room. The corner where Rusty had once barked frantically was empty, but a sense of unease remained. I scanned the footage carefully, my heart pounding with every passing second. And then, I saw it. In the reflection of a small, cracked picture frame on the wall, a face appeared. It was the smiling man, his eyes dark and hollow, his grin as sinister as ever. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his presence was unmistakable. Fear gripped me, but I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let him win. I would fight, no matter how many times he returned. This was my home, my life, and I wouldn't let him take it from me. As the night wore on, I sat in bed, camera in hand, ready for whatever might come. The battle against the smiling man was far from over, but I was no longer alone. With Rusty, Evelyn, and the knowledge I had gained, I would face him, again and again, until he was banished for good. And in the darkness, the smiling man watched, waiting for his next move. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Unseen Watcher. I moved into the old Victorian house with high hopes and a naive sense of adventure. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet, with an eerie stillness that clung to the air. It was exactly the kind of place I had always dreamed of, a grand old home full of character and history. But, as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice strange occurrences that unsettled my initial excitement. The first sign was the garden. Beautifully overgrown, it seemed to have a life of its own. Every morning, I found the flower beds trampled, as if someone, or something, had been wandering through them. At first, I blamed local kids, vandals looking for a thrill. Frustrated, I decided to install a security camera to catch the culprits in the act. Little did I know, I was inviting something far more sinister into my life. One night, after setting up the camera, I fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, I eagerly reviewed the footage, expecting to find evidence of mischievous teenagers. Instead, I found something that chilled me to the bone. There I was, lying in my bed, sleeping soundly. But in the background, barely audible, was a whisper. It was my name, repeated over and over, growing more insistent as the night progressed. I rewound the footage, convinced I had misheard. The whispers were unmistakable, though. "Eli. Eli. Eli." The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried an unsettling urgency. My heart pounded as I scanned the room and the video, looking for any sign of movement, any clue to who or what could be making those sounds. There was nothing. Just the static of the night and my own sleeping form. Determined to uncover the source of the whispers, I set up additional cameras around the house. Each night, the whispers grew louder, more persistent. "Eli. Eli. Eli. I could barely sleep, my mind racing with fear and confusion. During the day, I questioned my sanity. Could it be a prank? Some elaborate joke? But there was no one who knew about the cameras except me. The whispers began to seep into my waking life. I heard them in the shower, in the kitchen, even as I walked through the empty halls of the house. The once charming creaks and groans of the old building now felt like mocking reminders of my growing paranoia. Friends started to notice the dark circles under my eyes, the jumpiness in my demeanor. I tried to explain, but how could I make them understand? They would think I was losing my mind. One particularly harrowing night, I decided to stay awake, to confront whatever was haunting me. Armed with coffee and determination, I sat in my living room, eyes fixed on the camera feed. Midnight came and went, the house deathly silent. Just as I began to doubt myself, the whispering started again. Eli. 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 This time, it was different. The voice was closer, more intimate, as if it were right beside me. I felt a cold breath on my neck, and my blood ran cold. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest, but there was nothing. The room was empty, save for the flickering shadows cast by the dim light. Panic set in. I couldn't stay in the house another minute. I grabbed my keys and fled, not daring to look back. As I drove away, the whispers faded, but the fear lingered. That night, I stayed at a friend's place, too afraid to return to the house. In the safety of daylight, I resolved to seek help. Someone had to believe me. Someone had to know how to make the whispers stop. The next morning, I contacted a local historian, hoping he could shed some light on the house's past. Dr. Howard was an eccentric man with a passion for the macabre. He arrived at my doorstep with a stack of old documents and a gleam of excitement in his eyes. As we sat in the kitchen, the daylight filtering through the windows offered a brief respite from the dread that had settled over me. This house has quite a history, Dr. Howard began, spreading out yellowed papers and photographs. Built in the late 1800s, it was originally owned by the Holloway family. They were well respected in the community, but their story took a dark turn. He paused, glancing at me to gauge my reaction. I nodded, urging him to continue. According to local legend, the youngest daughter, Eliza Holloway, disappeared under mysterious circumstances. She was said to have been deeply troubled, hearing voices no one else could. After her disappearance, the family left the house, and it changed hands many times, each new owner reporting strange occurrences until they too abandoned it. The name Eliza sent a shiver down my spine. Eli. Eli. The whispers had been calling out a name so similar to mine. It couldn't be a coincidence. Do you think she's still here? I asked, my voice trembling. Dr. Howard leaned back, his expression thoughtful. It's possible. Restless spirits are often tied to unresolved trauma or unfinished business. Eliza's fate remains a mystery, and perhaps she's trying to communicate something. Desperate for answers, I decided to conduct a seance. Dr. Howard, intrigued by the idea, offered to assist. That evening, we gathered in the living room, the air thick with anticipation and fear. The house was eerily silent, the usual creaks and whispers absent as if it too were holding its breath. We sat around a small table, candles flickering, casting ghostly shadows on the walls. Dr. Howard led the ritual, calling out to Eliza Holloway, asking her to reveal herself. For a long time, nothing happened. The silence was oppressive, each tick of the clock magnifying my anxiety. Then, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and the candles flickered wildly. A faint, barely perceptible whisper began to fill the air. Eli. Eli. The voice was unmistakable, the same one from the recordings. Dr. Howard's eyes widened as he scribbled notes, but I could barely focus, my heart pounding in my chest. Eliza, I called out, my voice shaking. What do you want? Why are you haunting me? The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It was no longer just my name, but a jumble of words, phrases I couldn't quite understand. I closed my eyes, trying to concentrate, to make sense of the chaos. Suddenly, a rush of cold air enveloped me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and fear. Images flashed through my mind: an old wooden door, a darkened room, and a young girl, terrified and alone. I gasped, snapping back to reality. Dr. Howard was watching me intently, concern etched on his face. "Did you see something?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. I nodded, struggling to find the words. "A door, a room." She was so scared, I whispered. Dr. Howard frowned, deep in thought. "We need to find that room," he said finally. "It might hold the key to understanding Eliza's torment." Determined to uncover the truth, we began searching the house, combing through every nook and cranny. Hours passed, but we found nothing. Just as despair began to set in, Dr. Howard called out from the basement. I rushed down the creaky stairs to find him standing before an old, locked door, hidden behind a stack of dusty boxes. "This must be it," he said, his voice filled with anticipation. With trembling hands, I reached for the key hanging on a nearby nail. As the lock clicked open, a sense of foreboding washed over me. Whatever lay behind that door, I knew it would change everything. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of mildew and decay. As I stepped in, the floorboards groaned under my weight, and a chill ran down my spine. The room was sparsely furnished, with a single, dusty bed pushed against the far wall and a tattered doll sitting on it. It looked as though it had been untouched for decades. Dr. Howard followed closely behind, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "This must have been her room," he said quietly, his voice reverberating in the confined space. I nodded, unable to tear my eyes away from the remnants of a lifelong past. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing off the walls. "Eli. Eli." They seemed to surround me, pressing in from all sides. We began to search the room, looking for anything that might explain Eliza's fate. Under the bed, we found an old journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. My hands shook as I opened it, the whispers growing more agitated. The entries were written in a delicate, flowing script, detailing the life of a young girl tormented by unseen forces. She spoke of voices in the night, cold touches, and a growing sense of dread that consumed her every waking moment. One entry, in particular, caught my eye. It was dated just days before her disappearance. "The whispers are getting louder. They call my name every night, urging me to come to them. I don't know how much longer I can resist. I'm so scared." The words were smeared, as if she had been crying while writing them. My heart ached for her, the fear and isolation she must have felt. As I read, the whispers intensified, becoming almost a wail. Dr. Howard placed a hand on my shoulder, his face pale. "We need to do something," he said urgently. "We can't let her suffer any longer." I nodded, my resolve hardening. We decided to perform a ritual to help Eliza find peace, to release her from the torment that had bound her to this house for so long. That night, we gathered in the forgotten room, armed with candles, incense, and a book of ancient rites Dr. Howard had brought. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation and fear. As we began the ritual, the temperature plummeted, our breath visible in the frigid air. The whispers became a chorus, a cacophony of voices overlapping and intertwining. Dr. Howard chanted in a language I didn't understand, his voice steady and strong. I closed my eyes, focusing on Eliza, willing her to find peace. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the silence, and the room was plunged into darkness. The candles flickered out, and I felt a cold hand grip mine. I gasped, my eyes flying open, but I saw nothing. The whispers reached a fever pitch, a frantic, desperate plea. "Eli. Eli." I felt a tug on my arm, pulling me towards the wall. I resisted, fear clawing at my throat. Dr. Howard's chanting grew louder, more insistent. "Let her go," he commanded, his voice booming in the small room. The grip tightened, and then, as abruptly as it had begun, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening, the sudden absence of noise almost painful. The candles reignited, casting a soft, warm glow over the room. I looked around, my heart pounding. The sense of foreboding had lifted, replaced by a strange calm. Dr. Howard let out a breath he had been holding, his shoulders slumping in relief. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I believe so. I think we've given her the peace she needed." I felt a wave of emotion crash over me, relief, sorrow, and a lingering sense of connection to the girl whose whispers had haunted my nights. As we gathered our things and prepared to leave the room, I noticed something on the floor where the bed had been. A small, intricately carved box. I picked it up, curiosity piqued. Inside was a locket, its gold chain glinting in the candlelight. I opened it to find a tiny portrait of Eliza, her eyes sad but hopeful. It felt like a parting gift, a token of gratitude. We left the room, locking the door behind us. As I climbed the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that the house was different now. The whispers were gone, but their memory lingered, a reminder of the unseen forces that had once held sway over my life. I hoped Eliza had finally found the peace she deserved. Just as we reached the top of the stairs, the front door slammed shut with a force that shook the house. The air turned icy once more, and the faintest whisper echoed through the hall. "Eli. Eli." It seemed I had underestimated the depths of the house's secrets. The slamming door reverberated through the house, a jarring reminder that the haunting was far from over. Dr. Howard and I exchanged a look of mutual dread. The calm we had felt just moments before was shattered, replaced by a renewed sense of urgency and fear. We hadn't freed Eliza after all, something else still lingered in the shadows. Determined to uncover the final piece of the puzzle, we retraced our steps, looking for any clues we might have missed. The house seemed to mock us, the once comforting daylight now dimmed by gathering storm clouds outside. The whispers returned, more insistent than ever. "Eli. Eli." It felt like a countdown, urging us towards some inevitable conclusion. We decided to revisit the basement. The air grew colder with each step, the whispers louder. Dr. Howard and I searched every corner, but found nothing new. Frustration mounted until Dr. Howard paused, his gaze fixed on a section of the wall. "This doesn't match the rest," he muttered, running his fingers over the surface. It was smoother, less aged. Without hesitation, we began to pry at the paneling, revealing a hidden compartment behind it. Inside was an old, weathered journal, one that didn't belong to Eliza. The name on the cover sent a chill through me, Jonathan Holloway. He was Eliza's father, the man who had built the house. As we flipped through the pages, the horror of what had transpired here unfolded. Jonathan had been a deeply disturbed man, obsessed with the occult and dark rituals. Eliza's torments were not the result of random hauntings, but his own twisted experiments. The final entries revealed the extent of his madness. He had been trying to bind a powerful spirit to the house, using Eliza as a conduit. When she resisted, he locked her away in the secret room, hoping to break her will. Her whispers were a cry for help, but also a warning. The ritual had failed, but it had left a malevolent presence behind, one that had been awakened by our attempts to free her. "She's not the one haunting you," Dr. Howard said, his voice grim. "It's him. Jonathan's spirit is still here, and it's angry." The realization was like a punch to the gut. All this time, we had been focusing on the wrong ghost. We needed to confront Jonathan, to end his reign of terror once and for all. Gathering what courage we had left, we returned to the hidden room. The air was thick with malice, the temperature plummeting as we stepped inside. Dr. Howard began to chant, this time invoking a banishment spell. The room darkened, the shadows deepening into an impenetrable blackness. The whispers turned into a guttural growl, and then a figure materialized before us, a gaunt, spectral form with hollow eyes that burned with hatred. "Leave this place," Dr. Howard commanded, his voice shaking but resolute. The spirit of Jonathan Holloway loomed over us, its presence oppressive and suffocating. "You have no power here anymore." The growl turned into a scream, a sound so filled with rage and pain that it felt like it would tear the very walls apart. I stepped forward, holding the locket with Eliza's portrait. You used your own daughter for your sick experiments. You've caused enough suffering. It's time for you to go. The ghost's eyes flickered to the locket, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, or sorrow. But then the rage returned, more intense than ever. Dr. Howard's chanting reached a crescendo, and the spirit lashed out. A force like a hurricane knocked us back, but we held our ground. The room seemed to collapse around us, the very foundations of the house shaking. And then, with one final, ear-splitting scream, the spirit dissipated, leaving behind an echoing silence. The aftermath was surreal. The house felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. The whispers were gone, replaced by an almost palpable sense of peace. Dr. Howard and I emerged from the basement, exhausted but victorious. The storm outside had passed, the sun breaking through the clouds in a brilliant display of light. In the days that followed, I began to rebuild my life. The haunting had left its mark, but it had also brought a sense of closure. Eliza was free, and the malevolent force that had bound her was no more. I kept the locket as a reminder of the ordeal, a symbol of resilience and hope. But as I lay in bed one night, drifting off to sleep, I thought I heard a faint whisper. Eli. I sat up, heart pounding, but the house remained silent. It was just my imagination, I told myself. Just the lingering memories of a haunting that was finally, truly over. Or was it? The end. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.